The millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. Thank you for joining me today. And we have our traditional roundtable today. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. Lots to talk about. Of course, what has been in the news today. This morning, Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor, pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. We'll get to that a little bit later. Also, last night, you may have seen that jurors in San Francisco acquitted the illegal immigrant who was accused of killing Kate Steinle, although he was acquitted of all charges except for felony possession of a firearm. The United States Senate is still trying to pass a tax reform act, and the issue of triggering issues will certainly be something we'll talk about. Supreme Court will soon hear a case involving Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop. And, of course, one of the other articles we posted here, Representative Marsha Blackburn wants to release the names of lawmakers who used a hush fund to pay off women who were harassed by members of Congress. Lots of things, Penna, to talk about today.
Kerby and Kelly, it feels like the world has actually changed and shifted since last time we were all three together in here. None of the news stories that we're talking about today were news stories that we were talking about maybe 3 weeks ago when we were all here. So here we go. This is going to be a crazy Friday.
Kelly, we're going to spend some time talking about religious liberty. One of those, of course, is a big case before the Supreme Court. I know you'll be sitting in there as well. But we always on Friday like to talk about religious liberty. And the first article I've posted comes from your newsroom at First Liberty about high school students and the fact that you've won a case for religious freedom. And that's always good news.
Yeah, it's a young lady who's just great, who was asked to speak at graduation and then was told she couldn't mention her faith. And she stood her ground. And this is the reason it came out this week was there's some finality to everything. There was a public apology by the school district to her for what they did. They have dramatically changed their policies to make clear that this won't happen again to anyone in the future. So it's just one of those sort of good ending stories to somebody who, you know, did a good job in standing for their faith, and it's going to result in blessing a lot of other people who follow in her footsteps.
I think this is one of those times when people can be reassured that you don't necessarily have to go to court, that you just have to remind the school district, and sometimes you need sort of an official reminder from a legal group to say that these are what are constitutional, these are the rights students have, or teachers, or whatever. And, you know, once they're educated, they do the right thing.
Well, and I'll say this was a situation where at first the school district wouldn't even meet with her or
Isn't that something?
or us.
Yes.
And what happened is people in the community got angry. And all of a sudden, they realized that we probably should sit down and meet with them, and then but it's resulted in them, you know, not only apologizing to her, but in changing the policy for everybody in the future. So this won't happen. You know, you won't have this type of religious discrimination because people are confused or whatever. So good story. Meanwhile, same week that this happens, we get this victory. It shows that we still have work to do because we had to file a new case. It was actually a demand letter we had to send to a school district in Nevada because they were sending community information home in the kids, the packet that the kids were taking home. And you could talk about the winter festivals and everything, except for the one at the church, which mentioned there would be worship there. That was banned. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, you had just outright religious discrimination in the community groups. And so we're now in the process of getting that turned around as well. So right as you finish correcting one, and hopefully, for the future in policy, you see that there's another problem somewhere else that has to be corrected as well.
I might just mention, too, that the January issue of Outlook, actually, we have Chelsea, who is with your organization, writing a piece about student rights, and it's really kind of a summary of the material you can find at First Liberty. So if you find yourself saying, well, we can't have a Christmas party, we can't sing Christmas carols, we can't mention Jesus Christ in my valedictorian speech or whatever, all of those resources are available at Point of View by linking it to First Liberty. So, again, we felt that this was such an important issue that we actually have the next issue coming out on that.
That's great. And I would just tell people, whatever it is, I mean, the one you're mentioning, for instance, that we have is on, what are your rights as a student? What is your rights as a teacher? But we also have, what are your rights in the workplace, no matter where you work? What are your rights in the military to live out your faith? I mean, we have this in all different arenas for people. So whatever, and the main goal I would have for people is if they know their rights, then they're going to be emboldened and much less likely to, really sort of go, oh, well, I don't know if I can do anything, so I better not say anything. And, of course, that's what the enemy always wants us to do, is to censor ourselves. And so our goal is to let people know what their rights are so that they can be emboldened and live freely and do exactly what they're being led to do by the Spirit.
I am so glad to see that First Liberty is moving forward with this particular case. We've talked about it many times on the program before, but it's the case of this woman, Marianne Souse, who actually was in trouble for praying in her own home. And the courts have continued to rule against her, and so you're taking it to the Supreme Court.
Yes. This is it's one of those things that I think the listeners go, oh, that can't be true. She was told by police that she couldn't pray in her own home, and as this went up, it was in a posture, I'll just summarize it very quickly, where there are no facts in dispute, where all the facts alleged have to be taken as true. So it goes up to the Court of Appeals, and they say, okay, these are the facts. She was told by police, and I'm not going to go through the pages of what happened, but she was told in her own home by police that she was not allowed to pray. And the question was, is that a violation of the Constitution? Well, they said yes, but they said this is such an extreme violation that there's no case directly on point because it's never happened before that we know of, and therefore we're going to say that they're immune, and therefore the case is dismissed against the officers. And so it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, what an outrageous decision. So anytime now, the authorities, whether it's federal or state or whatever, want to violate your rights, if they do it in an extreme enough manner where there's never been a case so outrageous that they would have ever done that before, then they sort of are like the dog that gets the free bite. And this is essentially what they said. And so now this is going to the Supreme Court to say, oh, no, that's not what we do in this country. When you violate people's rights so horribly that nobody has ever done it before, it probably means that any reasonable officer should have known you can't do that. That's what the test is. And so hopefully, I mean, what we're actually asking the court to do is not even take the case, to take it, to rule, and to send it down without even the necessity of an oral argument.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what they do. But, I mean, this is the kind of thing, unfortunately, going on these days. It's not just kids who are told, that they can't get announcements about things in their community unless it's, not a church. But now we've got police officers actually telling citizens that they can't pray in their own home. And we're not clear on whether that violates the Constitution and whether they're responsible.
Let's take a break, and we, of course, given you one cause for celebration and two particular cases for prayer. And we've already got phone calls coming in. We haven't even gotten to the second topic here, but we have quite a few to talk about today. I can see someone to talk about the acquittal of the individual that killed Kate Steinle. Of course, Michael Flynn in the news as well, tax reform. And when we come back, we'll talk about this case involving Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop. What does that mean for religious liberty? All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, before this year ends, it's worth mentioning the anniversary of a terrible Supreme Court decision that occurred 90 years ago. Eric Metaxas mentioned in a recent Breakpoint commentary, and I wanted to add some important background to the infamous case known as Buck versus Bell. The High Court upheld a Virginia law that allowed them to sterilize Carrie Buck because they felt she was unfit to reproduce. To understand how we got to the court's decision, you need to go back to Charles Darwin. Most people forget that the complete title of Darwin's book on evolution was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. He believed that there were favored races and less favored races. He expanded on this in his later book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. This is an interesting irony. Darwin was a gentleman, a loving father, and a strong opponent of slavery. On the other hand, his writings unleashed a theory that justified racism and eugenics. It is easy to follow the path. Darwin's half-cousin Francis Galton established the first eugenics society. Galton proposed the idea of instituting breeding methods for humans, much like those used for livestock and other animals. Darwin's son, Leonard, succeeded Galton as head of the Eugenics Society. By the time you get to the 1927 Supreme Court decision, the ideas of eugenics and selective breeding had taken root. That's why in his majority opinion, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that it is better if society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. His most quotable phrase from the opinion was that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. This is one bad decision that traces its ideas back to one bad idea. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, again, we have the Supreme Court actually hearing a case, Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. They'll be hearing oral arguments December 5th. Kelly Shackelford will be there watching those. Penna Dexter with me and Kelly Shackelford. And we've posted a couple of articles, one that I thought would be very helpful to our listeners from the stream. And that's by Liberty McCarter, who actually used to work with you, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then David French, who was in studio. And David French put it this way: I've never seen a case more mischaracterized in my entire legal career. Let's talk about the case. Penna, give us some background, and why is he saying that it has been so mischaracterized?
Well, it's fun to read the stories about it now in the liberal papers because it's sort of high profile at this point. We've been talking about it for years.
Yes.
But the question I guess you could ask is it cake, or is it is cake baking and decorating a right, a message, a creativity that a person has, or is it just dessert that you're going to eat? Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it that way, you can make one kind of decision, but you look at it another way, that creating and baking a wedding cake with a message implies, in a sense, that you agree with that message. And so Jack Phillips has the perfect right to refuse to bake a cake that's all rainbowed up to say that, this is a same-sex union, and we're celebrating that. He refused to do it at great cost. The officials in Colorado have told him that he has to make these kinds of cakes. He has to force his employees to do so. He's refused, and he's lost 40% of his business. And these rights are important for these wedding vendors. So he has stood up, and we always talk about the importance of standing and the backup that you have from these organizations that will help you. So he is standing, and this case is now going to be argued before the United States Supreme Court. Kelly's got some views on what could happen here, and it's a little bit scary.
Kelly, you have the floor.
Well, it's a dangerous case, and I think there needs to be a lot of prayer, because if you look at this from a human standpoint, this was not a wise decision. We have 4 liberals on the court, 4 conservatives on the court, and 1 Justice Kennedy who goes to either side depending upon the issue. On the issue of LGBT, Justice Kennedy has written every major LGBT decision. So he wrote the Romer case back when he overruled the vote of all the people of Colorado on the most flimsy basis, saying that they must have engaged in invidious discrimination, as if he was God and could read everybody's heart in the state of Colorado. He's the one who wrote the decision overturning the Texas homosexual sodomy law.
Lawrence v. Texas.
Yeah. He was the one who wrote the one creating a constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And now he will be the swing vote on this case. And so from a human standpoint, the experts would tell you that, this doesn't look good. And, I really did not want this issue appealed until there was a change on the court, which will probably happen less than a year from now. So this is really dangerous. And so I really do encourage people, point of view listeners, to pray. I'm going to be in the court praying, but everybody should pray, because God can certainly change Justice Kennedy's mind, and this could be the first time that he surprises us all and goes the other direction. Or, to be honest with you, if that doesn't happen, God can change one of the justices between now and June, when the decision will probably be handed down. And whatever method he wants to use, we just need to pray that he'll protect us from ourselves, because this could be a really dangerous case, I think.
Kelly, during the when the Obergefell decision was handed down, the decision that really gave us same-sex marriage across the land, invalidated the state laws in the states that were protecting marriage, it was just outrageous. And the one sort of silver lining that we saw was actually something that First Liberty Institute had written in a amicus brief on, and ended up in Justice Kennedy's decision that said that religious people who disagreed with same-sex marriage would be protected. You can give me the wording because you probably have it in your heart. Mm-hmm. You guys got that in there, and that was awesome. But we can't hold on to that, do you think? Or can we?
We can't. We're going to see if that's true or not. At the same time, you had Justice Kennedy throwing in that paragraph saying, while I'm creating this new constitutional right to same-sex marriage, I want to make clear that I'm not telling, other groups that they don't have a right to disagree, advocate for something different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, saying that they had, freedom to disagree. Justice Alito, in the dissent, wrote, will you have freedom to disagree? He's essentially responding to that. And he says, sure you will. From the recesses of your home in a whisper. Mm-hmm. That's what he said. So he was basically saying, as other justices in the dissent were saying, don't believe any of this stuff, because as soon as the chance is to say, sorry, you can't have a different agreement, you watch what they will do. That's what they were warning. And that's what most people think will happen in this case. And look, the thing that's often lost in this case is people are like, well, they denied people services because they were gay. False. I mean, none. There's been a ton of these cases. Not a single case has anybody been denied, buying baked goods at the store or anything because they're gay or because they're, whatever. It's always been when then they try to force the cake maker, the floral arranger, the photographer, the, whatever.
T-shirt guy.
Yeah. It's when they force them to participate in a celebration or a wedding or something. And weddings are typically sacred to people. They have certain beliefs about that. So it's when they're forcing them to engage in artistic expression. For instance, in this case, Jack Phillips offered to sell them a cake that was on the rack, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted him to make one for them. It's forcing him to participate and to express something that he didn't agree with. And that's where these cases are. And again, when the government can do that, I mean, It's amazing how short-sighted people, especially in America, the LGBT community in the UK has actually come out and said, in these cases, you shouldn't force people. A number of the leaders in the UK, because they understand if you give the government the right to force citizens to express things in a certain viewpoint, you've lost everything at that point. I mean, we're all slaves to the government. We have to say what they tell us to say. And I don't, care if you're religious or not. That should send chills down your spine. And that's what this is about. I mean, I want you to think about it. Our clients, Aaron and Melissa Klein, are bankrupt. Their bakery is gone. They were fined $135,000 because they wouldn't promote the government's message, because they had a different religious belief. And, you got to realize if they can do that to Aaron and Melissa, if they can do that to Jack, who's going to be there on Monday, then they can do it to you. And I don't care if it's because of religious belief or any other belief. They can say, your beliefs are off, and you either communicate this message and go along with this, or we will destroy you. And we're the government. We have that power. And so the Supreme Court is going to be asked, are they going to give the government that power, or is the Constitution, the First Amendment, actually going to protect people as our founders intended it to?
Pitched that way, you would think the liberal members of the court would say, wait a minute, because we've talked a while back about the T-shirt maker in Kentucky and how even lesbians in New Jersey were saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be forced to create T-shirts that we would disagree with any more than you would. Jack Phillips hasn't discriminated against them because they're gay, because after all, he's in many cases turned down all sorts of other kinds of cakes for bachelor parties, a divorce celebration, and all sorts of stuff,
Even anti-American cakes he's turned down.
And so it's the
an anti-gay cake, too.
It's a message on the cake or a message on the T-shirt. But this has ramifications, doesn't it, to a lot more than just Jack Phillips, doesn't it?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think, unless this case is very, very narrowly decided, which maybe it could be, I don't know. It just seems like it's going to set a huge principle and precedent. And, the wedding vendors, they've been the ones at risk, and they're kind of the tip of the spear in this argument for the right of businesses to operate as they choose. And so if Jack's Masterpiece Bakery falls, then, I think Katie barred the door. It's going to be bad for Christians.
To me, compelled speech is one of the most disturbing violations of freedom I can imagine. I mean, for the government to be able to force you to say things that violate your conscience and your beliefs at threat of destroying you, your livelihood, everything. I mean, absent sort of physical violence, I wonder what else is. I mean, this might be worse than physical violence. I don't know, but I mean, the idea that they can force citizens. That is, I mean, boy, this is the penultimate of freedom to me. And if you cross this line, I don't know that there are any lines left.
Well, we've already got some phone calls, so we'll take those right after the break. If you'd like to join us, especially on these religious freedom cases, 1-800-351-1212. A little bit later, we'll move on. But again, 1-800-351-1212. If you have some comments, we'll be right back.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll move on in just a few minutes to some other topics, but at the moment talking about Jack Phillips' Masterpiece Cake Shop and, of course, the case that will appear before the Supreme Court next week in terms of oral arguments. Let's head out to California first. David, thank you for joining our conversation today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, morning. You know, I was kind of looking at this from the angle of taxation with or without representation. And when you start looking at the way that this, whether it's this story has been told to the public or whether it's the tax laws are looking at these businesses, basically, if you set up a business, you know, you go down to the county courthouse and you put in for a business license, you're kind of pledging to the population that you're going to live up to the standards of town, right, and live up to the standards of the Constitution. And if you're a company that's getting a certain tax break for anything, you know, if you're just an independent shop and you don't get a single tax break from anything, you pay all your taxes to the proper amount, you can exclude your own customer base. No shoes, no service. You know, that's standard, right? But when somebody's getting a tax break, it's the entire population that's giving them a tax break. And
is he getting a tax break?
Well, I know that something like Walmart, you know, if they're making cakes for people, they have to serve everybody.
We're not talking about Walmart. We're talking Walmart, though. We're talking about a little cake shop.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where this has got me stumped. Because if you look at these rulings in history, you know, you don't automatically just get the right to set up business and do whatever you want willy-nilly. You don't just throw pollution in the creek and laugh about it and take the money and run. You know, you have to live up to the standards of health and safety. You have to live up to the standards of, you know, civil discourse and law. And the idea that somebody has decided to, I mean, if I was gay and was getting a cake, I don't want the chance that somebody's going to be spitting in it. Or you know, leaving something nasty in it just to get even. I mean, I don't want to do business with people that don't like me, but I don't want to give a business license to a company that's going to go out of their way to dump stuff in the creek or to pollute the skies or poison the waters. That's kind of the standard for the way these lawsuits get resolved, is whether or not there's taxation with representation. And if a company is like a Klansman, you know, cake company, and they won't serve anybody that isn't pure white Christian, then they're not doing anything good for the community. And in fact, they're defying the very principles of equal justice under the law. So that's where this has got me stumped, is how is it that this case has wasted so much court time if the guy's an outright bigot, he doesn't want to do any business with anybody other than his basic, demographics, he's never going to expand, and he's, only going to go as big as his demographics take him. But if he is getting any kind of tax abatement, for having concrete, curbs and gutters, or his sewers are connected to the to the town's wastewater system, and he's getting tax breaks for recycling, or if he's, this is where it comes into the abuse of the taxpayer as opposed to just being a bigot.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
Well, again, this is kind of interesting because if there was a situation in which you were refusing service, then these are a public accommodation laws.
Right.
But it seems to me that what's happened here is these public accommodation laws have been expanded to apply to artistic creations, and that's different. I mean, if somebody were to walk into Masterpiece Bake Shop and say, I want a cake, I want a cookie, and they'll say, well, I'm not going to let you in because you're gay.
Right.
First of all, that doesn't happen
That's
because
not what happened.
he serves gay customers.
Yeah.
So public accommodation laws and even the tax breaks and those things don't apply. This has to do really with First Amendment creativity, doesn't it, and religious liberty?
Yeah, that's the point of the case. I mean, in none of these cases. I mean, for instance, think of Barronelle Stutzman, the grandmother who did the floral arrangements. These two gay men, she sold them flowers all the time. She loved them. But then they said, we want you to do the flower arrangement for our wedding. And she said, I can't. I can't participate in a ceremony that violates my faith. That's very different. And it's very different from I won't serve you to I won't participate in a particular religious ceremony. You're going way over the line now. And especially with whether it's photography or all these things that require artistic expression. And I think the interesting thing with with Jack and the masterpiece is, and by the way, the name of his shop is out of Scripture. I mean, this is not like some Johnny-come-lately Christian. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time.
And people knew where he stood. That's back to the David question a little
exactly.
bit.
Exactly. This is about...
These guys came in to create a problem, perhaps. If not in this case, we know of other cases where they were a setup, for example.
Yeah, and look, ultimately, what I would say to people normally in a discussion is, people have different beliefs on same-sex marriage. But the thing that I think all Americans should be able to agree upon is people have a right to have different beliefs on same-sex marriage. And if you start to say, oh, no, the belief that's now in control is pro-same-sex marriage, and those who don't toe the wagon, we're going to punish you.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything more anti-American than that. I mean, this is why this country was founded. People came here of different religious backgrounds, whether you're a Quaker or a Baptist, which was a minority faith at that time, or we could keep going, Mormon, whatever. They came here so that they could actually have their beliefs, live them out, and have the government not persecute them for having different beliefs than the majority. That's exactly what this is. This is an attempt to say, no, this is the new moral belief, and you will now do exactly what we tell you. And you will express things that you disagree with or participate in ceremonies or very sacred activities that you disagree. I mean, I don't even understand why people even have a question on this. Anybody who understands freedom should immediately understand, God forbid this ever happened to me on a different belief or a different, that's just, it's really frightening where we are on the precipice here and what this will mean for the freedom of our children and our grandchildren if this begins to go the wrong direction.
When it began to be more open that people were having same-sex relationships and unions and things like that, there was this demand for tolerance. And so, a lot of well-meaning people said, we need to tolerate this because this is, the way they are, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the rise of the sexual revolution. So you have people who are religious, and then you have people who just cling to the sexual orientation or the way they want to have sex or how much they want to have sex in or out of marriage. It seems like now that the sexual revolution, those values are trumping people's religious values. And that's really that's what's being decided in the court this next 6 months as they look at this case.
That's the thing. It's unnecessary. You can have both, right?
You can have tolerance, true tolerance.
And that's what true tolerance really is supposed to be about, is I disagree with you, but I'm not going to come and have the government try to force my beliefs on you. And that's what, again, there are a number of LGBT leaders who get that and who say this is wrong. Unfortunately, there's more in other countries than in the United States. And I think it's part of a virus or a poison that's getting in people's brains in this country I mean, you've got polls now coming out saying that half the country thinks that hate speech shouldn't be protected. And, I mean, it just makes your head want to explode because you're like, are you really that stupid? I mean, the whole point of free speech is to protect speech that people don't like. I mean, the idea of, well, your free speech is protected as long as we think it's okay. Well, then there's no need for free speech protection. The whole point is to protect speech that people think is abhorrent, maybe, or they think is really wrong or bad. And so we really are losing. I don't know. There's a lack of teaching. There's a lack of understanding. There's a real problem out there in the country with not understanding freedom and what it requires.
We need to take a break, but we have some other phone calls, so I think we'll take those because some people want to try to get some clarification on what I think is a very important case next week. You may not have heard the mainstream media talking about that. That's because we understand how significant this case is. We'll come back and take another call or two right after this.
Delighted recently by an interview the Wall Street Journal published with the husband-wife team behind the long-loved Babar the Elephant children's books. Laurent de Brunoff is 92 and says Babar's Guide to Paris, published this year, is his last. As a kid, I loved the Babar books. Babar's character was created by Jean de Brunoff in 1931. In the first book, the young elephant saw his mother shot by a hunter and fled the jungle to save his own life. In the city, he learned the ways of French civilization, and with this wisdom returned to rule a jungle kingdom, Celesteville, named after his wife. Jean de Brunoff wrote and illustrated 7 Babar books before his death in 1937. His son, Laurent, whom the journal says is arguably a more gifted artist than his father, picked up the series and ran with it at age 21. He's written over 50 Babar books. The books are a beautiful collaboration between Laurent and his wife Phyllis Rose, who is 75, and a retired professor of literature. According to the journal, Monsieur de Brunoff develops an interest in the theme, say the Olympics, and starts to sketch elephants throwing javelins. Ms. Rose's job, then, is to weave the imagination into a narrative. I read Babar books to my children and appreciated them even more as an adult, although I did detect socialist themes in the running of Celesteville. A sort of utopian innocence reigns there. But the Babar books are compelling, filled with adventure, family, and benevolent leadership. The longevity of this series is impressive. Ms. Rose told the journal it suggests a kind of changelessness in what appeals to human beings when they're very young. But, she says, the original Babar book could not be published today. She says the publisher simply would not allow the death of a mother to be mentioned. Reading with beloved children is fun, and there are time-honored books you'll both enjoy. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Let's go to Missouri this time. Scott, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby. Excuse me. Sorry, I had something in my throat. Thanks for taking the call.
Well, glad you called.
I'd like to make a point that I think I made several months back, that this whole idea of public accommodation is interpretive because, as an example, we have an implicit right in the Constitution to serve and consume alcohol, and yet there are dry counties, there are restaurants that do not sell alcohol, and so the idea of public accommodation with respect to the baker, I don't see it any different than that. If he has a religious or non-religious conviction that he just doesn't want to deal with this issue, it seems to me that as long as it's not harming these people in some way, which is clearly not, they can walk down to the next baker and get the cake they want, just as someone could leave McDonald's and walk down to Applebee's and get the alcohol they want. So I don't know if one of the callers' arguments about taxation without representation is a valid argument, simply because it seems like we've already addressed that in the alcohol debate. And I would say, with respect to Christians, the preacher of our church who just retired after 22 years, I thought made a good point that in the midst of persecution, Christians are often given a way out. If you look at what happened in early Israel, the Christians were scattered throughout the Middle East, and then Christianity sort of migrated up into Europe, and it always migrated to a place where that freedom was kept alive. And I'm thinking that even if we get to the point where Christians are basically persecuted in the United States as they are in the Middle East, I think God's going to take care of it. He will take care of it in some way, shape, or form, but He will take care of it, because He's not going to let His children down. He hasn't done that in 2,000 years. So I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, I think one of the provisions that God has for this is the opportunity to use the court system to your advantage. And that's why the First Liberty Institute grew up. In order to do that, you needed people who were lawyers, who knew the law, and then, people who would fight for things that are right and good. And so that, that's part of God's provision, I think. And so as long as we can take advantage of that, we should.
Yeah. And people I think know this, but I mean, I think we had 430 some odd religious liberty matters last year. And for 17 years in a row, we won over 90% of the cases. So we're winning. The law is on our side, but we have to have people willing to stand for these freedoms and to go through some difficult circumstances in a number of cases. And, I would point out that this is not, we talked about earlier, this doesn't have anything to do with the fact of, taxation without representation or all these things. That's really not, this doesn't really have any connection to that at all. This is, because that argument is essentially the same argument that the Solicitor General made a number of years ago in the Hobby Lobby case. And I was in the Supreme Court when this argument was made, and he said, look, when you go into business, you waive your religious freedoms. You're now playing by the government's rules with the specific words. And that's essentially this argument. Well, since there's taxation, then, you've now got to play by the government's rules, and you don't have any religious freedom. Well, you're in the wrong country, because in this country we do have religious freedom. Now,
even if you use the public sidewalk and the sewer system.
Yes. That's crazy. Again, God forbid they ever get what they're looking for, because they're not going to like that society.
No.
Because if the government, and look, this goes back to the very basics. If you lose your religious freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
The founders called religious freedom the first freedom for a reason. They understand that if you lose that, you lose everything. Because once the government has control of your discussion of the most ultimate issues of life and your conscience, what really is left? Really nothing is going to be left. They're going to take your political freedoms, your free speech, everything else. So what's so sad about a lot of this is people don't realize when they give the government this power, they think, oh, look, I'm giving the government this power to crush my opponent. The same power you just gave them will be used against you.
Yes.
And that's the thing that's so incredibly, it's like, don't you see what's happening? You just want to shake people and go, how foolish, that you think you're getting your opponent when you're destroying yourself and the freedom of your children and your grandchildren, because you're going to get your, why don't you beat them with arguments? Why don't you beat them with truth? Why don't you have a discussion? Instead, they want the power of the government. You don't need the power of the government if you really want to win the argument. These are really important cases. This is a very important case. Compelled speech is ultimately what this is about. And I just, when the government can compel a citizen to engage in specific speech or action, I mean, you're a slave now. I mean, you really have. And it's bad enough if they said, you have to go pick up these rocks, Kerby, or we're gonna destroy your business and throw you to jail. But no, it's not just that. It's we're going to compel you to do something that specifically violates your beliefs and your conscience. It's even worse. Or we're going to destroy you and your business or whatever else. I can't think of anything more dangerous outside of the government saying we're going to engage in physical violence against you if you don't violate your conscience and faith.
What about Scott's argument, which seemed to be compelling to me, and we'll get it out of this issue of cakes for a minute. Suppose that I'm a pharmacist and somebody says you have to prescribe an abortifacient, and yet there's a pharmacy down the street where that can take place, or an individual is asking you to do photography and you offer another photographer that would take that picture, or somebody asks you to be a florist and offer those. I'm not using hypothetical cases, as you well know. In some respects, if this is ruled the right way, this would begin to affect photographers and florists and innkeepers and pharmacists as well as bakers, wouldn't it?
Well, absolutely. And look, I mean, this is the thing that everybody knows. I mean, is anybody going to have a problem getting a cake, a gay wedding cake? Of course not. They're not going to have a problem. I mean, in almost every one of these cases, like I think of the sweet cakes, which is our case out of Oregon, or, Jack. I mean, all of these places, they could go right around the block and get a wedding cake.
And oftentimes we're referred to another place.
Absolutely.
Right?
And same with flowers, same with photography, so this isn't about getting the services because they're readily available. This is about hunting around until you can find somebody who has a religious objection or conscience issue, and then making your political point by putting the screws to them and seeing if you can have the government punish them for not following your belief system on how they react in these situations. It's totally unnecessary. We always want to accommodate people's religious beliefs if we can. There are situations in which we can't. And if you can't, then you create a conflict and you sort of go through an analysis in the courts of, is there a compelling governmental interest that requires us to do this? But the first step you always see is, can we avoid this conflict?
Right.
Because we respect religious freedom, even if people's beliefs are weird or different or not in the majority. We want to respect religious freedom.
Well, we need to take a break, and we have some more phone calls, but I think we might change the topic, but we'll see how some of the calls go during the break, because we have a few other things to talk about today. Michael Flynn is in the news, as well as the United States Senate trying to pass tax reform. And, of course, one of the articles we've posted here by Marsha Blackburn, representative, wants to release the names of those individuals who are actually being paid out of a hush fund. And we didn't even know this existed. I've heard about the fact that there was a creep list on Capitol Hill warning some of the women to stay away from certain legislators, but your tax dollars were being paid into a hush fund. So we've got a lot more to talk about. We will do that right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And, of course, we have some links to some of the things we've talked about. The first issue that we dealt with was the issue of religious freedom for future students, and that article is on our website. Then we have two articles about Masterpiece Cake Case, which is one we dealt with the entire first hour because how important that will be next Tuesday. And Kelly Shackelford will be in studio, actually in the courtroom, I should say. Wish I could get you in studio, but maybe we can get you. I think you're going to do a Facebook Live, aren't you?
Right. And
we'll see if we can provide a link so that we can find out what that is. And then I'm looking forward to getting you in studio to hear some of the comments as well. But let's see if we can get to a couple of other issues. One of those, which you probably heard about last night, and that has to do with jurors in San Francisco acquitted the illegal immigrant who was accused of killing Kate Steinle. That was not at question. But the issue was he was acquitted of all charges except for felony possession of a firearm. Love to go around the round table. Here is a 5-time deported illegal alien, 7 counts of felony. This is not the kind of person you want in your country. But at the same time, I think the jurors at least were convinced that this was an accidental discharge of a weapon that killed Kate Steinle. Your thoughts, Penna?
Yeah, well, she was walking on the pier in San Francisco with her dad and someone else, and she was shot, and the bullet did ricochet off the ground. But this guy was a 7-time convicted felon. He'd been deported 5 times. He was back here. Despite a federal immigration detention request, the sheriff had released him from jail. And yet, I think that what this is just that whole area of the country, San Francisco, especially Northern California, they're just ruled by the left. And it's, the whole idea of these cities being able to be sanctuary cities where you don't have to comply with the federal government's immigration laws is a way of keeping the left in power. And so, kind of bottom line for this, that's the reason why this kind of judges are on the court, and that's why they made this the jurors are out there that were chosen for the case. There's just that mentality. It's almost like it's another country. And I'm saying that as a person who grew up in the state of California, but it's almost unrecognizable to the patriotic American. And it's so sad. I mean, it's very sad. I don't know, how people can feel safe now in a state like that.
It's so funny because words have been redefined. We've talked about how gay has been redefined, tolerance has been redefined. Well, the word sanctuary has been redefined. I mean, I don't feel safe. I don't feel like it's a sanctuary when I go to a place where an individual could actually either accidentally or intentionally kill another person. And so this is a real concern. Kelly, I know you've been looking at these cases from a legal perspective. Any thoughts?
Well, my first thought is I don't think I would feel good taking my family to San Francisco. I've got to think that this is going to really hurt their tourism because I don't think it's a safe place, both because of what happened and because of the jury. Look, this guy, a 7-time felon, and the basic thing that the takeaway for everybody is that Kate Steinle would be alive if they didn't have this sanctuary city policy. I mean, the federal government asked for them to hold him, for them to get him out of the country, and they refused. They let him go, and he killed this young woman. which is it should never happen.
Right.
It's very difficult to sue cities and sue government entities, but I think the family has sued. I hope they take San Francisco to the cleaners. I mean, I hope they get $1 billion verdict. You know, they deserve it because they killed Kate Steinle as much as this guy did. When you let a 7-time felon who's been deported 5 times and you refuse to let the federal government get him out of our country, there just aren't words for you. So the city of San Francisco is at fault majorly here. On the actual criminal trial itself, what's I think confusing to most people is, he made a bunch of arguments. His story changed.
Yes.
He
was shooting sea lions at one point. He said
he found. I don't think anybody believes he found
the
gun under his bench where he was sitting. It's the dumbest thing. Of course he didn't find it. Okay, so then when he comes up with, well, he really wasn't shooting at anybody, it accidentally went off. I don't know that anybody really believes that either. Okay, let's say you don't go with it was premeditated that he shot into people. One of the counts was just involuntary manslaughter.
Right.
So was he reckless? I don't know. When you grab a gun where it goes off and shoots into a bunch of people, do you think that's reckless? I think almost everybody would say it's reckless. When you think of what people who in their car accidentally cause somebody's death,
right,
they get manslaughter,
right,
and yet this guy didn't get it.
Yes.
I just think it boggles the imagination of anybody to know how a jury could get to that result. But I tell you, no matter what I think, I've run into a number of people today that said, I would never take my family to San Francisco.
One of the people that was on the and just got tired of waiting was saying, how about they charge him with a lesser count? And you just mentioned one that they didn't, and so the only one, and that is amazing, the only one was a felony possession of a firearm because, of course, in California.
Well, they shoot themselves. Those guns shoot themselves.
We don't want you to have a firearm, so we have to at least find that one. But just before we go to a break, there's another way to look at this, and that is the House of Representatives passed a bill called Kate's Law, which was named for Kate Steinle, and it was passed the House of Representatives. It would have tougher penalties for illegal immigrants who've been deported and illegal reentry of the country. This bill hasn't been taken up by the Senate. So if people are upset about this verdict, it seems to me that we could encourage them to contact their 2 United States senators and say, bring this bill up.
Do you think that if that bill, say, passed the Senate, was signed by the president, which he would definitely sign it, he campaigned on it.
Yes.
Do you think that the state of California would obey that law? I have my doubts.
No, I think they could definitely pass these types of laws. They could tie it to funding.
Yes, that might get attention of the state of California.
There's a lot of those things they could do. Right now, what happens is they're filing lawsuits because that's what Attorney General Sessions and the president are trying to do. Is these people with sanctuary cities? They're trying to say, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're not sending you federal money. And they're going into court and saying, you can't do that. Only Congress can do that. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's have Congress do it then. So they can definitely do that kind of thing where they tie the federal money they're receiving to the fact that they're not cooperating, with immigration officials to try to get rid of these felons who come back into the country.
Yes. Well, and again, if they tied it to funding, you know what would happen? You would find some liberal judge that would at least put a stay on it and it'd have to go to the Supreme Court. And we'll see where the court takes it or where the Ninth Circuit Court, how they would probably rule on this.
It would have to go to the Supreme Court.
So there we go again. Well, again, if you want to comment about that, I know some of the questions you had about the Kate Steinle case and Kate's Law, that's on the table. We come back, though, I want to talk about this hush fund. It's something we've been postponing until now, but sexual harassment, here finding out about members of Congress. And as I've said before, there was rumors of a creep list that was making their way around the Capitol area so that you'd know who to stay away from. It's even worse. There was a hush fund. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, before this year ends, it's worth mentioning the anniversary of a terrible Supreme Court decision that occurred 90 years ago. Eric Metaxas mentioned in a recent Breakpoint commentary, and I wanted to add some important background to the infamous case known as Buck versus Bell. The High Court upheld a Virginia law that allowed them to sterilize Carrie Buck because they felt she was unfit to reproduce. To understand how we got to the court's decision, you need to go back to Charles Darwin. Most people forget that the complete title of Darwin's book on evolution was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle of Life. He believed that there were favored races and less favored races. He expanded on this in his later book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. This is an interesting irony. Darwin was a gentleman, a loving father, and a strong opponent of slavery. On the other hand, his writings unleashed a theory that justified racism and eugenics. It is easy to follow the path. Darwin's half-cousin Francis Galton established the first eugenics society. Galton proposed the idea of instituting breeding methods for humans, much like those used for livestock and other animals. Darwin's son, Leonard, succeeded Galton as head of the Eugenics Society. By the time you get to the 1927 Supreme Court decision, the ideas of eugenics and selective breeding had taken root. That's why, in his majority opinion, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that it is better if society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. His most quotable phrase from the opinion was that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. This is one bad decision that traces its ideas back to one bad idea. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I am not ignoring the phone calls, but again, when we have 2 talented people sitting across from me, I'd love to give a chance for you to hear from them first, but we will get your calls. So 1-800-351-1212. But I did want to put at least one more issue on the table. It is an article that we've posted. I think it's our 4th article. Courtney O'Brien writes about it, but it's something I've been following for a little bit of time, and that is the fact that there apparently is a hush fund. Now, if you were listening a couple weeks ago, we did mention this, but now we know a lot more. And it turns out that there have been secret payouts for harassment claims that have been to more than 200, and that amounted to $17 million. So Representative Marsha Blackburn is seeking a release of the names of the lawmakers. But Penna, let me come to you first. When we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, this member of Congress is saying, of course we know, and I'm going, I did not know at that time we had $17 million that we paid for with our tax dollars. When somebody is guilty of sexual harassment, that person should pay. But members of Congress actually used our tax dollars to pay off these individuals. I'm really concerned about that, first of all, and I hope Marsha Blackburn is able to release those names.
Okay, Marsha Blackburn, of course, and there's other women in Congress who are sort of taking the lead on this. I think Barbara Comstock. And so the question I have is, who knew about it and who didn't? Did even Marsha Blackburn, even these other conservatives? I mean, how did they get by not knowing about this, that this existed, or did they know and now they're just finally getting it out there? There has been everywhere. Even today, the news about Matt Lauer, of course, came out, and today we're hearing that even the co-hosts who put on an act the other day when they announced that he was fired knew.
Yes.
That of his proclivities. And so there's this knowledge and this kind of looking the other way that's been going on in a lot of different institutions in our culture. And part of me says, well, I don't want to see every flirtatious comment outlawed. And, people come out and because somebody said something that offended me about, whatever. So where do we draw the line on this? And what is the definition of harassment in all these payouts? I mean, some of them, we heard of Conyers from Michigan, he was basically for employment requiring certain favors of certain people. But other times, is it just something that someone was offended by and they're going to make a big deal out of it? So Congress, in order to keep their Republicans and Democrats in their seats, is going to settle with them. So it's a really awful situation we're in because the payouts are bad. But I think that now that everything is just pouring out into the open, it's going to be bad too.
I mean, the first question here, the focus is these people that, hush money was paid on behalf of, should their names be released? Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't think anybody in the country has any question. Absolutely. But I think the ultimate issue that Penna's going after here that I agree with is I want to know how this happened.
Yes.
Okay, I want to know.
Was this under Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, or was it under Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, right? I mean, it's a good question to ask.
I want to know how this was created by somebody, and somebody knew about it, and I want to know who all those people are.
Mm-hmm, me too.
And then I want their pension taken away. I mean, I think we ought to do something, and I think the American people have every ability to do something. This is an incredible abuse of power. This is I feel like this is, extortion, or I don't know. There's some criminal about this. The
Ready
idea
to drain the swamp?
Yeah.
Let's drain the swamp here.
I think we need to find out how this came into being, who knew about it, and then those people ought to pay a heavy price because, I mean, it's just so outrageous what they were doing, using taxpayer money to pay people off, to keep names secret. I mean, this whole thing is just... I mean, it's just unfathomable that somebody would even think of such a thing. I mean, it really shows a mentality of incredible, like, I am a king, I can do whatever I want, I have the power, and therefore I will be treated differently than my subjects in the country. It's just so arrogant, and I mean, it takes a level of arrogance to even think that you could do this, and I mean, that somebody would even conceive, hey, let's do this deal where, unlike every other citizen, when we sexually abuse people, when they complain, we'll make them go through this process that nobody else has to go through, that our names will be kept secret, and then, if we have to, and there really is something there, we'll pay them off with taxpayer money. I mean,
it's just a head shaker. It's hard to believe that. And when a couple of weeks ago we had this representative, and again, give her credit, from California Democrat saying, of course we know. And I'm going, that's when Penna and I are going, we don't know that. Whoa, where did that come from? And apparently a lot more people than just leadership knew about it as well.
Absolutely.
So that is a real concern as well.
Yeah.
How about an independent counsel on this? How about somebody outside of, maybe it's I don't know, a special counsel or whatever. Somebody needs to investigate this from outside the House and the Senate and show us what really happened here.
Yes.
Last weekend in the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan's column was entitled "The Sexual Harassment Racket is Over."
Yes.
And it was almost prophetic over some of this news that even, it just added to the news that was already there. But, it's really kind of an atmosphere of taking it very lightly and taking some of these activities lightly. And now they're going to be taken seriously. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes too seriously, and, always saying that the person who's accused is guilty before looking at the facts. So that's a danger. But it's also, I think, good that it's not going to be taken seriously or lightly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look back, I mean, we talked earlier about the sexual revolution. And I think there's a sense in which you separated sex from marriage. And so, it becomes a plaything. And it does become taken more lightly, not only by men, but by women too. And, you can also look at just the sexualized culture that that everyone's allowed and sort of looked the other way at. And it's all like bubbling up now. And, I don't know how or where it's going to settle down. In a sense, it's sad when the government has to step in and arbitrate these things. But I think in one sense, passing a law, now we've got to pass a law in Congress that disallows these types of payouts. But, how is this going to come down? It's too bad when people can't police themselves, but it's kind of obvious that even people in the highest halls of power can't.
Well, I wonder how much of this would have been different or maybe not if the Clinton...
I've wondered about that.
I think it would have been different.
And a lot of people have said that, as a matter of fact.
If feminist leaders, so-called feminist leaders, would have actually been true to their principles back then and basically put their foot down and thrown Bill Clinton over the cliff, said, no, you not only abused a young girl, but you did it with your power as president. If that would have been said to be, you can't do that, then I wonder how much that would have gotten into the culture and that would have stopped everywhere as far as, that would have been unacceptable. But clearly, what's been going on, I mean, it's just amazing. It's like, I don't know how you feel, but I feel as a Christian like everybody else is finally understanding a moral truth that we all were like, duh, we're like, of course. But everybody else is all of a sudden going, hey, this is wrong. And you're like going, well, why did you not understand that beforehand? And then what's happening is that's emboldening more people to say, this is wrong. I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to speak out. And so it's a great thing in a number of ways. It's just, as Penna says, you got to be careful because some people, they're not Christian. They don't understand the Bible. They don't understand right and wrong. And so they just think that if there's an allegation now that, they must be guilty. No. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be true. And so you've got to sort of make sure that we stay in the rails here on right and wrong and not sort of get politicized into some movement or you're hurting off a cliff, right. With everybody else. But I really think it's bizarre to watch. It's bizarre for me to watch because it's like everybody's realizing sexual harassment's bad.
Yeah.
And we're all going, well, we've known that for our entire lives. And it's wrong because, doing to others as you would do unto yourself. I mean, it's kind of basic.
Well, and as some of the people around here have said, how does Hollywood sell movies? Sex. So then they're surprised that there's sex there, in the casting couch, and we find out there are hush funds and all sorts of stuff. But again, sometimes they're unwilling to even apologize. Did you see the Charlie Rose one the other day? It says all of us are coming to a new realization about this. No,
they're
all of us did not do what you did,
Yeah.
And Nancy Pelosi is saying, well, that was a different time under Bill Clinton. I mean, even now we're still getting the excuses because they don't want to call sin.
Amen.
And they don't want to have rules that might constrain them. So as long as it's consensual, anything goes. We got a full bank of phone calls, so we'll take those calls right when we come back. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to those calls right after these messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We're going to take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. In Georgia, WPWB. And Jeannie, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I do appreciate your program. I just wanted to preclude that. The other thing is I wanted to ask a question about those who've been the recipients of the hush money to cover up what went on in Congress. Are they not guilty of something called blackmail?
I don't think so. Again, I don't know. I'd like to. I mean, we need to know more of what this system was, because essentially the way this would normally work outside of Congress and their bizarre royalty scheme that they created is you would file with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that you'd been sexually discriminated against or harassed. They would investigate, the federal government, to see if there's a claim, and they might even, support your claim and take your lawsuit for you. If they would not, and they were too busy or didn't have enough workers or whatever, then you could get your own attorney, and the attorney could file a lawsuit. And then you would try to prove in court that you were sexually harassed or assaulted or whatever, and you could go after, monetary damages for what happened. Maybe you were fired, maybe you lost promotions, everything else. As I understand it, what they were doing here in Congress was creating a new system to say, no. If you work here in Congress, you don't file with the EEOC. We are taking you out of that law, and this is the only way you can get a recovery now. Is you have to write your complaint in a private way and fill it in and do this, and then we're still going to keep the person's name anonymous, et cetera. And at the end, if it looks like it really happened, then we're going to pay you the hush money. So I think that's what happened is they essentially didn't allow them to go to court like normal citizens, and they had to go through this star chamber backroom thing, and this was their only way to get any compensation for the damage.
Well, what a system for a bunch of lawyers to come up with to protect themselves.
Let's go to Kentucky. Vicky, I think you have a similar question, so let's give you an opportunity to ask it. Go ahead.
Yes, I cannot understand why that these women, they got sexual harassed, would wait so long to bring this out and destroy people's lives. We don't even know that it even happened.
Again, you would assume that it probably happened if they paid out the hush money, so I got to believe that. The question is, why did they wait? And I think the bottom line is that whether it's in Hollywood or whether it's with Matt Lauer in New York, because we learned how draconian that situation was. If you go against me, you will never work in this business again. Or in Capitol Hill, it's a pretty small group when you get right down to it, that if indeed you were identified as a troublesome employee by a member of Congress, what are your chances of working anywhere else on Capitol Hill? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, the question probably is most appropriate for the Judge Roy Moore accusers, because those are like 40 years old, right? But all of these, I think, are sort of caught in the same cultural, change that's going on right now. Mm-hmm. And that is that if you most of the women who I think clearly, even where you've had admission of wrongdoing by the perpetrators here, they're asked, why didn't you come forward quicker or sooner or whatever? And they said, because I knew what would happen to my career. I would be gone in D.C. or in Hollywood or in, wherever it is. And so they just felt like they had worked hard, maybe, many years to build up to the point where they were towards the top of power. And then power abused them, of course, and they didn't want to fall down the rungs because they thought, now, because culturally this is unacceptable, all of a sudden in a whiff of, I don't know what you'd call it, all of a sudden the scales come off everybody's eyes.
Yes.
Now they realize I can come forward, and so everybody's kind of coming forward, which is great to some extent, but it is bizarre, especially, the Judge Roy Moore situation. 40 years ago, that's really bizarre. Why do he's run for a lot of offices, right? And so I don't know. But I think in a lot of these other ones, it's just this movement that's going on right now where people realize they can come out, they will be listened to, and it's not acceptable. And maybe they're past the point in their careers where this is going to, because I even heard somebody last night on TV that said a number of people they knew in the major networks who had been sexually assaulted have still not come out because they still think it would hurt their career too much. And so this person knew a number of the top executives at the major networks, but said, it's not my place to name them, but I know women who have been sexually assaulted by them.
I see that, yeah.
Yeah, because really when you look at in Hollywood, the people that came out, like Gretchen Carlson at Fox started this several months ago with the Bill O'Reilly allegations. And so, or not Bill O'Reilly, what's his name?
Yeah.
I'm blanking.
Murdoch?
Ailes.
Roger Ailes. And
Sorry.
so, but she's gone. Where is she? She's not out there. She's not famous anymore.
She had a show at the time.
She had a show, and her show's gone.
Roger Ailes.
And so who is there that's come out that's famous that has still maintained their career? Nobody in Hollywood has.
Yeah, and again, when you have big people, or really influential people is probably a better way to say it, like Harvey Weinstein or Matt Lauer, that makes it a little safer, but it still isn't completely safe. But again, Vicky's asking why they wait so long. That's a good question to ask, and it's a reasonable question as well. But let's go back to the phones because we have some others getting back to the case that we dealt with in terms of Kate Steinle. So let's go to California, KNLB, and Tom, I think you wanted to add something to that discussion as well.
Yeah, my comment is a child who gets a hold of an unsecured gun that is loaded and accidentally shoots himself or herself, the parent winds up getting charged with the murder of a child, and 12 juries of this guy's peers can't find for the family of Kate Steinle guilty, but we can for parents who don't secure their guns.
There you go.
There's something wrong.
I think so.
Justice system.
If you wanted to have a perfect illustration of a miscarriage of justice, I think that's a pretty good case. You know, what happens if a child accidentally unloads a firearm and it hurts or kills somebody? Guess who gets charged with something? And in this particular case, the only charge against this illegal immigrant, 7-time felon, 5-time deported individual, is felony possession of a firearm. That's the only thing he was charged with.
Yeah, again, it's bizarre, and you only go back to California, which is more troubled probably by somebody having a firearm than they are by an innocent young woman getting murdered by an illegal immigrant. It's just backwards. But if I had to guess, I would say that this jury would have penalized an American citizen who held this firearm much more severely than they're going to punish this guy.
Yes.
Which tells you everything. I mean, I think if the trial wasn't about any of the illegal immigration, the fact that the guy was deported 5 times, he was here illegally, San Francisco refused to hold him over so the federal government could get him out of the country. Let's ignore all that, and let's say now the guy who did this was just a American citizen who liked firearms, and he had one, and and they could get him on some firearm violation or whatever. I think that would be outrageous. He had a firearm in San Francisco, and we got to put this guy under the jail. It's just so backwards, it's unbelievable.
It is even hard to make up. Let's take another phone call in California, KYCC. Barbara, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for taking my call. My comment is, it's kind of twofold. It goes back to Genesis when Joseph and Pharaoh's Potiphar wife came after Joseph, and that was kind of like sexual harassment back then. And then how many men are being sexually harassed but are too proud to come forward to say that these women are doing things to them, too?
That's a good point, because I'm sure some of that takes place as well, seductions and things like that. And you have more and more women that are in positions of power, and, of course, that is a possibility as well.
Well, I think that's one of the downsides, like we're talking about. One is that you presume men guilty, right? But the other is this whole mood, which is good in a lot of ways, in that people are free to come forward and expose this evil, is that some people, unfortunately, women, will take advantage of this and use this. I mean, they'll use the fact that they can make a false allegation and be immediately believed as leverage, as a threat, and as something that's done. And so that's why we got to be careful with making sure that allegations are allegations, and we need to look at, what sort of corroborating evidence do we have, and what do we have to make sure that do we know this is true or false? I saw Shannon Bream last night say she did a bunch of these cases. Some of the time she was being lied to, and she found that out, and sometimes she wasn't.
Yes, I saw that as well. We'll get some more phone calls, but we need to take a break. We'll be right back.
I was delighted recently by an interview the Wall Street Journal published with the husband-wife team behind the long-loved Babar the Elephant children's books. Laurent de Brunoff is 92 and says Babar's Guide to Paris, published this year, is his last. As a kid, I loved the Babar books. Babar's character was created by Jean de Brunoff in 1931. In the first book, the young elephant saw his mother shot by a hunter and fled the jungle to save his own life. In the city, he learned the ways of French civilization, and with this wisdom returned to rule a jungle kingdom, Celesteville, named after his wife. Jean de Brunoff wrote and illustrated 7 Babar books before his death in 1937. His son, Laurent, whom the Journal says is arguably a more gifted artist than his father, picked up the series and ran with it at age 21. He's written over 50 Babar books. The books are a beautiful collaboration between Laurent and his wife Phyllis Rose, who is 75, and a retired professor of literature. According to the Journal, Monsieur de Brunoff develops an interest in the theme, say the Olympics, and starts to sketch elephants throwing javelins. Ms. Rose's job, then, is to weave the imagination into a narrative. I read Babar books to my children and appreciated them even more as an adult, although I did detect socialist themes in the running of Celesteville. A sort of utopian innocence reigns there. But the Babar books are compelling, filled with adventure, family, and benevolent leadership. The longevity of this series is impressive. Ms. Rose told the Journal it suggests a kind of changelessness in what appeals to human beings when they're very young. But, she says, the original Babar book could not be published today. She says the publisher simply would not allow the death of a mother to be mentioned. Reading with beloved children is fun, and there are time-honored books you'll both enjoy. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that one of the articles that we did not get to is the last article here. It's called Reality Check, the Facts versus the Left's 2 Top Lies About Tax Reform. This week, some of you have even said, I keep hearing from the Democrats that this would actually raise taxes on the middle class. Well, that's one of the things he spends a lot of detailed time looking at. The other is the argument that these tax reform proposals are a giveaway to the rich. And, of course, you probably have seen some of those as well. So I wanted you to at least know that article is there, since we probably won't get to it. But that's just, again, an issue. We'll probably be talking about it next week. We'll see whether or not the United States Senate passes tax reform. And if they do, of course, they'll have to merge that with the differences with the House version, and we'll see whether we really get tax reform.
And what's in there too, because there's talk of, for instance, sliding the Johnson Amendment repeal in there,
right.
and a number of things that might affect issues that we talk about in addition to tax.
Yeah.
I mean,
repealing the individual mandate in Obamacare.
Right.
One thing I want to mention about the myths and the things that are kind of swaying people, and that is that when they score these. And there was a score that came out yesterday from the Joint Committee on Taxation saying it's going to lead to $1 trillion more in deficits. Okay.
Right.
But they always do this on static scoring, and they assume a lower growth rate. And already this latest growth in GNP,
3.3
GDP, 3.3%. So if you have that, I mean, this it's going to blow all of this out of the water.
Yes,
and that's with the hurricanes. The 3.3 is with the hurricanes. Yes.
So, and it was funny because Ted Cruz came out with this idea that, if you want to have a trigger that says, okay, if we don't grow as fast and it doesn't end up in the money that we think is going to come into the government, then there'll be this automatic trigger that says, okay, we could raise taxes on corporations. He says, why don't we have an automatic trigger if we overgrow?
Yes.
If we grow faster, then half the money that comes in as increased revenue will go to pay down the national debt. I thought that was a great idea.
That's a great idea.
I would love to. We got a lot of phone calls here. I'll do my best to get in a few more calls. So let's go to the state of Georgia this time. Fran, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay. I've been listening to the program, and I've also been listening to the news and things like that. To answer why people are waiting so long before they come forward. Yes, you're dealing with a lot of people just starting out in their jobs, a lot of innocent girls, boys, whoever, are threatened that if you say anything, you'll be fired, you'll never work again in the city. That's another reason why people are just now coming forward. The concern I have is this has been going on for a long time, and it just didn't start with the Clintons. And I think, yes, that's a concern, but you also look at the Kennedys, and the Rat Pack, and the whole position of power. It's almost like if you're in any position of power, nothing applies to you. We've seen it in the Catholic Church. We've even seen it in large church congregations where I think it's obviously it's evil, and somehow it's that Delilah spirit that takes over, especially in the church. But I'm glad to see, as hard as it is to swallow now, that it's all starting to come to a head, because it did come to a head a little bit in the business world. There's a lot more that has to happen. I'm a victim of it myself, so I can tell you why people didn't say anything and don't say anything. And this is a time where they feel, or maybe if I come forward, so many people have, I can get this off my chest and feel free.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of these women do feel free when they finally come out. They've had to hold the secret. One of the things that Peggy Noonan so eloquently said was that there will always be sin, and we're never going to wipe that out completely. But what's happened here is that there's no stigma in out-of-wedlock sex anymore. Mm-hmm. And so when the stigma was gone for that, I think in a sense, it hurts women, because women don't have that argument anymore to say, I'm going to stay pure, and people understand that. Now, people just don't understand it when you take that position, because the culture has they've really tried to remove that value. It still remains in the church, but the left and the secular liberals are trying to take it away in so many ways, and that's why we're looking at the Masterpiece Bakery case. At the beginning of the program, we talked about that your religious sensibilities now are not important enough to the culture, and we have to fight for the right to hold on to those conscience opinions and that are motivated by our religion. It's got to stay important, or we'll really, we'll be chaotic. I mean, I feel like we're in chaos right now, and the people in the halls of power are trying to make some sense of that, But really, you can't do that without a basic moral compass in the culture. And, the left has done everything it can to remove that.
Yeah. Well, again, if you have barriers and you have boundaries and you have rules, then things work. And then you have chivalry and you have honesty and you have propriety and you have fidelity and you have all these words that sound like they belong in the 19th century with buggy whips. That's kind of what we've run into when the sexual revolution has thrown off everything and said anything you want to do sexually with anybody at any time, as long as it's consensual, is okay. But when everybody's doing anything they want to do at any time, what does the word consensual mean anymore? And so we have sexual anarchy. We shouldn't be surprised.
No, that's exactly right. And I think I do think Fran's point is interesting that this it's sort of like people knew it was wrong, but somehow they just let it go. This power and use of sex and everything, and all of a sudden, she mentioned the Kennedys and all that, but I see JFK being a philanderer and everything, but abuse of women and all this and okaying that, I really think the Clinton situation is the most, glaring example, because everybody knew what happened and everybody kind of took a pass on it. I don't know why, but for some reason, it's really like God's lifted the scales off of everybody, and everybody finally sees this for what it is, and it's not acceptable. And I wonder what other things like this are in our culture that we know is wrong as believers, but the culture doesn't get it yet. I don't know what that is. I can't think of anything like that. I mean, what's going on now? I'm thinking of, is there another time? Are there other times in our history when all of a sudden basic Christian principles were finally seen by the rest of the culture? I don't know, but it is really unique to watch this happen, and
quite a time we're in.
Again, it's just you worry because they don't have the Bible and the moorings of truth where they try to take this thing in some different direction, and they miss the point. But right now, they kind of seem to be focused on coming out saying this is wrong, and people are even, whether they're sincere or not, they're apologizing. They're saying I'm ashamed. Oh my gosh, somebody's ashamed about sin. Somebody's apologizing, and it's just like it's a miracle to watch. And so there's right and wrong. There's actually some limits. There's a God-given role for these things, and there's a way we treat people, and I don't know. There's a good part of all this, but you just want it to stay good and not be used for something bad.
Let me apologize to an entire bank of phone calls that we did not get to. We did get to 7 today, but we certainly could double that number almost instantaneously. So don't forget that next week we will be doing our programs, and we'll be actually celebrating the 45th anniversary of Point of View. So we'll have some great guests that you will enjoy next week. And, of course, Penna will join me. And, of course, we'll also have our Friday weekend edition, and we'll be hearing from Kelly in the Supreme Court. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian